Y'all, the jury did not hear the whole story. Not even close. And I thought we knew this case. High school track meet, two 17-year-old boys, an argument underneath a team tent, a knife, one teenager dead, another eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. And from the very beginning, Karmelo Anthony said essentially the same thing. I acted in self-defense. And a Texas jury, they heard the evidence, and they rejected that defense. They convicted him of murdering 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. Y'all, that looked like the ending, right? But now we're learning something that changes the way we understand the trial itself. You see, the jury, they didn't hear everything, and it wasn't even close. Because during Karmelo Anthony's attempt to get a new trial, lawyers have begun revealing evidence deliberately kept away from those jurors. And some of what prosecutors say they had concerning Karmelo is very disturbing. You see, there was a lengthy history of alleged behavioral and aggressive problems. And also, he had an alleged fascination with knives, guns, and fighting. Even problems involving a former girlfriend. Y'all, a photograph of a knife reportedly sent on the morning Austin was killed, and a message about being low-key on the verge. There was even a message prosecutors described as Karmelo fantasizing about stabbing somebody and licking the blood from the knife. Y'all know how we do things here. We're not going to stop there, because the jury didn't hear everything about Austin Metcalf either. Previous fights, racist language, racist graffiti, and juvenile trouble. So the question today isn't simply, was Karmelo Anthony guilty? A jury, they've already answered that question. The question is, what would that jury have thought if they'd been allowed to hear everything? Because somebody made the decision to keep these two teenagers' backgrounds outside of that courtroom. And now that decision is sitting right in the middle of Karmelo Anthony's fight for a new trial. Hey, y'all, I'm DJ. You know, here at DJ Southern Storytelling, we've always kept the facts and the evidence up front. We won't tell you any lies. We throw all the bullshit and the false narratives out the window. So let's get into this and let's see where this story takes us. Let's get it. Now, I need you to understand that before we get anywhere near that track meet, we need to talk about something that we didn't fully understand during the original trial. And that was Karmelo Anthony's behavioral history. Now, recent reporting from the new trial proceedings describes prosecutors as possessing a 75-page notice of extraneous offenses and character evidence involving Karmelo, and that is very significant. Reporting about the material describes years of allegations involving aggression and violent behavior, and says Karmelo had been referred to programs for troubled youth. Now, I'm going to draw a really hard line there. You're going to hear people on social media call him mentally ill, and I ain't going to do that. Unless somebody produces reliable medical evidence establishing an actual diagnosis, I'm not going to diagnose this young man from behind a microphone. Behavioral problems are not automatically mental illness, but we can discuss documented behavioral history. And according to what is now being revealed, there were warning signs concerning aggression long before April 2nd, 2025, and that definitely matters. Because when we eventually get to what happened on the morning Austin died, we're not looking at the first allegation of troubling behavior. Oh no, we're looking at another event at the end of a much longer history. And apparently the prosecution knew about that history, and the jury did not. And hey, to be fair, now we got to do exactly the same thing with Austin. Because I'm not going to tell you everything prosecutors had concerning Karmelo and just pretend nothing existed on the other side. Austin was 17. He attended Frisco Memorial High School. He played football and participated in track. He had a twin brother named Hunter. But the new hearing revealed another side of Austin's history that was not presented to the murder jury. According to testimony concerning his juvenile background, Austin had been involved in previous fights and disciplinary incidents. There was also an incident involving racist graffiti. Now, evidence discussed during the hearing reportedly included racist language and symbols, and the prosecutor himself characterized some of that material as vile and racist. There was also testimony concerning messages and material recovered from Austin's phone that the defense believed demonstrated racist attitudes. And that needs to be reported. But it needs to be reported accurately. Evidence that Austin had previously used racist language does not prove Austin called Karmelo a racial slur underneath that tent. Those are completely different claims. And nothing in Austin's past means he deserved to be stabbed to death. We're discussing this for one reason. The jury didn't hear it. Just like they didn't hear the damaging evidence concerning Karmelo. Now we arrive at the morning everything came together. Frisco, Texas. Students from different schools gathered around for a track meet. And it was raining, really raining. Teams were trying to stay underneath their tents. Karmelo Anthony attended Centennial High School. Austin attended Memorial. But Karmelo ended up underneath Memorial's tent, and that's where Austin encountered him. Now, according to testimony and police accounts, Austin told Karmelo he needed to leave, to vacate. But Karmelo didn't leave. Yes, there were words exchanged. The situation escalated. Witnesses said Austin physically confronted Karmelo, and Karmelo had a knife. But what nobody sitting on the original jury knew was what prosecutors say had been happening before Karmelo ever got underneath that tent. According to information revealed at the new trial hearing, Karmelo had been having serious problems involving his former girlfriend. A prosecutor said she reported that Karmelo was refusing to accept the end of their relationship. There were allegations of stalking, and on the morning of April 2nd, according to prosecutors, she actually went to a school official. She was reportedly very frightened. Think about the timeline, y'all. This ain't 6 months before the stabbing. This ain't even 6 days. According to the courtroom reporting, this was less than just 2 hours before Austin Metcalf was fatally stabbed. And then investigators looked at Karmelo's communications. Wow, that's where this story gets considerably darker. Prosecutors say and showed Karmelo's phone contained very, very disturbing communications involving violence. They described an interest or fixation involving weapons, knives, guns, and fighting. And among those communications was an alleged message about fantasizing, about stabbing somebody. There was also a photograph, y'all. Now, according to prosecutors, Karmelo sent his former girlfriend a photograph of a knife on the morning Austin died. And along with it was a message. I'm low-key on the verge. Now, y'all think about what that means. I'm low-key on the verge. I'm not going to answer it for you because that would be the power of suggestion. And I don't do that shit. Well, within hours, Austin Metcalf would be dead from a stab wound. Now, listen carefully. That does not prove Karmelo was planning to kill Austin. There is an enormous factual problem with making that claim. Karmelo and Austin apparently didn't have some established personal beef or long-standing feud. There was no verified evidence I'm aware of showing Karmelo woke up that morning thinking, man, today I'm going to go kill Austin Metcalf. We're not going to turn evidence into something it doesn't establish. But here's what prosecutors absolutely could argue. What was Karmelo's state of mind that morning? That's where these messages potentially become very, very important. Because hours later, A disagreement underneath a tent escalated into deadly violence. Now, Austin did confront Karmelo about sitting underneath Memorial's tent. Karmelo was told to leave, to vacate. And he didn't, and words escalated. Now, witnesses testified about the physical confrontation. I reckon Karmelo had the pocket knife. And when the confrontation became physical, Karmelo stabbed Austin in the chest. Now, Austin's twin brother Hunter was right there. Hunter desperately tried to save him, but he couldn't. Austin Metcalf, he died way too young at 17 years old. Karmelo was arrested, and almost immediately the case divided the entire country. Was this murder, or was it self-defense? Karmelo maintained that he had warned Austin, "Man, don't touch me." His defense would eventually argue that when Austin became physical, Karmelo reasonably believed he needed to defend himself. Prosecutors saw it completely different. They called it unjustified, and they called it murder. And eventually 12 people would have to decide. But before those jurors ever heard the case, something happened between the lawyers. Supposedly it was a gentleman's agreement, a handshake, something we're only now fully understanding. Prosecution had very damaging information concerning Karmelo. The defense had damaging information concerning Austin. And according to testimony at the new trial hearing, prosecutors in Karmelo's original defense reached an informal understanding. Keep the case under the tent, meaning, let's try this case based on what happened between these two boys at the track meet. We don't need to put their entire lives on trial. Don't bring in Karmelo's alleged behavioral history. Don't bring in Austin's juvenile history. And do not bring in the racial material. Don't bring in everything prosecutors reportedly had concerning Karmelo's fascination with violence. Keep the focus underneath that tent. And considering how racially charged this case had become and still is outside the courthouse, you can understand why lawyers might have wanted that. Karmelo's black, Austin was white. The case had already become a national argument. Y'all, big threats were being made. People online, they had chosen their sides and drew a line, refusing to budge. Bringing allegations of racist conduct into the trial while simultaneously bringing Karmelo's alleged violent history before the jury could have turned the proceeding into something completely different. Instead of deciding what happened underneath the tent, jurors could have ended up deciding which teenager was the worst person. Y'all, that's not what a murder trial is supposed to determine. So the lawyers apparently tried to keep both doors shut. But then came a problem that nobody could ignore. You see, Karmelo Anthony had something that nobody else could provide. His own explanation. Only Karmelo could tell the jury exactly what he believed when Austin approached him. And only Karmelo could explain whether or not he was frightened. Only Karmelo could describe what he thought Austin was about to do. Now, in a self-defense case, that can be extremely important. So Karmelo considered taking the witness stand. But the stand means something else. Cross-examination. Once a defendant testifies, prosecutors get their chance to ask questions too. And according to Karmelo's current lawyers, disagreement developed concerning exactly what prosecutors would be allowed to ask him. Now, his original lawyer believed their agreement protected certain background material. Prosecutors apparently interpreted the situation differently if Karmelo testified, and eventually there were negotiations over the issue, but Karmelo didn't testify. And now his new attorneys argue that what happened surrounding that agreement interfered with his ability to present a complete defense. That issue is one of the reasons we are back in court today. The jury heard the confrontation evidence. They heard witnesses. They heard all about the knife. They heard Karmelo's self-defense argument through his attorneys. But they did not hear those newly discussed text messages. They did not hear the alleged knife fixation, and they did not hear the former girlfriend's allegations whatsoever. Nor did they get to hear the full behavioral material prosecutors possessed. And they didn't hear Austin's damaging background either. Then the jury deliberated, and they rejected self-defense. Well, on June 9th, 2026, Karmelo Anthony was convicted of murder. The same jury eventually sentenced him to 35 years in prison. That verdict remains in effect today. Well, after the trial, Judge John Roach gave a television interview. Now, what do y'all think about that? Let me know in the comments. A judge over such a high-profile case doing a TV interview? And when he was asked whether the jury got it right, he answered, "Oh yeah, they did." Now think about that too. Karmelo was preparing post-trial challenges, and the judge, who would potentially be dealing with issues surrounding the case, had publicly expressed approval of the jury's decision. Well, Karmelo's new attorneys wanted him removed. A visiting judge agreed that Roach's impartiality could reasonably be questioned. So, Judge Roach was removed from the post-trial proceedings, and retired Judge Michael Chitty was assigned to consider Karmelo's request for a new trial. And that's when some of these details finally began coming into public view. Y'all ever heard the saying, "You better be careful what you ask for"? I'm really kind of afraid this might be the case in this one. Now put the two piles beside each other. Prosecution's pile. A lengthy history of alleged behavioral and aggressive problems. Reported intervention through programs for troubled youth. An alleged fixation on weapons and fighting and problems with an ex-girlfriend. Stalking allegations. Disturbing messages. A reported fantasy concerning stabbing. A photograph of a knife and the message, "I'm low-key, on the verge." Reportedly sent the same morning Austin died. Okay, the defense's pile. Austin's previous behavioral incidents. Fighting. Racist graffiti. Racist language. Juvenile trouble. And material the defense believed demonstrated racist attitudes. Neither pile went before the jury in the way we're hearing about it now. And that's what makes this hearing so damn fascinating. Because everybody can look backward and say, "Man, the jury should have heard this shit." But which pile? Karmelo's, Austin's, or both? Because once you open that can of worms, you may not ever be able to get the lid back on that can of worms, y'all. So this is where I'm going to separate DJ Southern storytelling from social media fan fiction. The knife photograph and disturbing messages are potentially important evidence. They are not proof that Karmelo planned, premeditated Austin's murder. Austin's racist history is potentially important background, but it is not proof that Austin racially threatened Karmelo that morning. Karmelo's alleged history of aggression doesn't automatically eliminate self-defense. Austin's history doesn't automatically establish self-defense. Because evidence does have boundaries. And this case has already suffered enough from people taking one piece of info and stretching it until it says something it doesn't actually say. So the question remains, what happened during those final moments underneath that tent? But the newly revealed evidence raises a very legitimate second question. Should the jury have known more about what came before those moments? Now here's something I don't think everybody asking for a new trial has considered. Now remember what I said. You got to be careful what you ask for. And be careful opening a can of worms that you cannot ever put the lid back on. So suppose Karmelo gets one. Hey, that's a victory for his lawyers. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's a victory for Karmelo. because it don't mean that Karmelo just gets to walk out of prison. It means another prosecution, another jury, another trial, and potentially another fight over this evidence. Now, prosecutors are permitted to introduce some of these communications in a second trial. A future jury could hear information the first jury never heard. Imagine being a juror hearing that on the morning of the killing, Karmelo allegedly sent a photograph of a knife. Imagine hearing the former girlfriend's allegations. Imagine hearing prosecutors describe a history of violent or aggressive behavior. Y'all, that could definitely hurt Karmelo. But then imagine the defense being permitted to introduce Austin's previous fighting and racist material. That could also affect how jurors evaluate Austin as well. A second trial could therefore be dramatically different from the first. Getting a new trial and getting acquitted are not the same thing. Not even close. So where are we as of today? Well, as of August 21st, 2026, Karmelo Anthony has not been acquitted. His conviction has not simply disappeared. He remains convicted of murdering Austin Metcalf and was sentenced to 35 years. What is happening now is a challenge to the fairness and procedure of his original trial. His attorneys are arguing, among other things, about the evidentiary agreement, his decision not to testify, jury instructions, and courtroom access issues. The prosecution maintains the conviction was properly obtained, and the judge considering the new trial request has not yet turned these revelations into a new verdict. So when you see somebody online saying, Karmelo got a new trial, better check the date, check the court, check the source, because this case is moving quickly. So my final thoughts. Y'all, I really keep coming back to one thing. These were two 17-year-old boys. That's where the story starts, and that's where I think it ought to end. I don't care which side social media tells me I'm supposed to join. I ain't a follower. I'm not going to join one of those groups. I'm going to follow the evidence. Some of the evidence we're hearing now concerning Karmelo Anthony is very disturbing. And if prosecutors accurately describe those communications, I want to know about them. I want to know about that photograph. I want to know about those messages, and I want to know about the behavioral history that existed before April 2nd, because if there were warning signs for years, well, that's definitely part of this story. But I ain't going to turn behavioral problems into a psychiatric diagnosis because I don't have that degree. And I ain't going to hide Austin's background simply because Austin became the victim. Or he's white. If the racist graffiti and other material attributed to Austin are accurately represented in court, it's part of the record too. But listen to me carefully. Austin's past didn't sentence him to death. And Karmelo's past doesn't automatically tell us what was going through his mind during every second underneath that tent. That's precisely why we have trials. Well, y'all, that's the update on Karmelo Anthony as of today, August 21st, 2026. So I guess we'll see you the next time in the Florida room. Peace.